The door swung open with a force that made everyone in the room turn. Muhammad Ali stood there, his imposing 6'3" frame filling the doorway, eyes scanning the faces of the 12 white sports commentators who had been talking about him moments before. The room fell silent. The men who had been laughing and joking about that loud-mouthed fighter now sat frozen, papers clutched in their hands, coffee cups suspended midway to their lips. "Gentlemen," Ali said, his voice cutting through the silence like a knife, "I believe you've been discussing me." He stepped into the room, letting the door close behind him with a soft click that somehow sounded like thunder in the stunned quiet. It was 1967, just 3 months after Ali had refused to be drafted into the U.S. Army, citing his religious beliefs and opposition to the Vietnam War. The sports world had erupted in outrage. His boxing license had been suspended, his title stripped. The men in this room, the most influential sports commentators in America, had been among the loudest voices condemning him. Xavier Collins, a young black journalist who had managed to infiltrate this exclusive club of white sports writers, sat in the corner, his notepad open, but his pen still. Unlike the others, he wasn't shocked by Ali's entrance. He had tipped the boxer off about this meeting. Xavier had earned his place in these rooms through brilliant analysis and a charismatic on-camera presence that made viewers forget their prejudices, if only for a few minutes. But behind closed doors, he heard what these men really thought. "I heard you call me a traitor," Ali continued, walking slowly around the table. "I heard you say I should be locked up. I heard you say my career is over." He stopped behind one of the commentators, Howard Mitchell, the most vocal of Ali's critics. "But what I haven't heard is any of you say it to my face." Mitchell's coffee cup clattered onto its saucer. "Now see here, Clay. My name," Ali said, his voice deadly quiet, "is Muhammad Ali." "Whatever you call yourself," Mitchell said, regaining some of his composure. "You can't just barge in here, this is a private meeting." Ali smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Private, like the conversations you've been having about me on national television, calling me unpatriotic, saying I've betrayed my country?" His voice rose with each question, filling the room. 40 million Americans watched you call me a coward last week, Mitchell. Nothing about what you do is private. Xavier Collins watched the scene unfold, his pen now moving rapidly across the page. He had been covering Ali for 2 years now, ever since the fighter changed his name after joining the Nation of Islam. Xavier understood better than anyone in the room what Ali was fighting against. Not just in the ring, but in rooms exactly like this one, where decisions about a black man's future were made by white men who had never faced a day of the prejudice Ali battled his entire life. "You've got your facts wrong, Ali," said Richard Barton, an older commentator with silver hair and cold blue eyes. "We're not discussing your personal choices. We're discussing your responsibilities as a champion, as someone young people look up to." Ali's laugh was sharp and sudden. "My responsibilities? Let me tell you about responsibilities." He placed both hands on the table and leaned forward. "I have a responsibility to stand up for what I believe. I have a responsibility to show those young people that principles matter more than popularity. And I have a responsibility to my conscience." "Your conscience doesn't change the law," Mitchell shot back. "The law?" Ali straightened up, his eyes flashing. "The law once said my ancestors were property. Should they have followed that law too?" The silence that followed was deafening. Xavier caught Ali's eye across the room and gave him an almost imperceptible nod of encouragement. This was the Ali that Xavier had come to admire, not just for his lightning-fast fists and poetic trash talk, but for his unwavering conviction and courage. "Gentlemen," Ali said finally, "I came here today because I want you to know something. You think you're telling my story, but you're not. You don't know my story. You don't know what it means to be me. And yet you sit here, in your comfortable chairs, passing judgment." He looked each man in the eye, one by one. "You think my career is over because I won't fight in a war I don't believe in? Let me tell you something. My career is just beginning. You can take my title. You can take my license. But you can't take my dignity. You can't take my voice." Ali turned to leave, then paused. "And make no mistake, I will be champion again. And when I am, I'll remember who stood with me in my darkest hour, and who pushed me deeper into the darkness." As he reached the door, Mitchell called out, "You're making a mistake, Ali. You're throwing everything away." Ali turned back one last time. "No, Mitchell. The mistake was thinking you had the power to define me. I define myself. With that, he was gone, leaving behind a room of stunned silence and one smiling journalist. Xavier Collins closed his notebook and stood up. "Gentlemen, I believe that concludes our meeting for today." As he walked out, following in Ali's footsteps, he knew he had just witnessed history, and that the real story was just beginning. 3 weeks later, Xavier Collins sat in the office of Sports Illustrated's editor-in-chief, Frank Reynolds. The tension in the room was palpable as Reynolds flipped through the pages of Xavier's draft article about Muhammad Ali's confrontation with the commentators. "You can't publish this, Collins," Reynolds said finally, tossing the pages onto his desk. "Half these men are friends of mine. They buy advertising in our magazine." Xavier leaned forward, his voice calm but firm. "With all due respect, sir, this is journalism. Ali confronted these men about their biased coverage, and the public deserves to know. The public deserves to know what we decide they deserve to know," Reynolds countered, his face reddening. "That's how this business works." "Is it?" Xavier stood up, towering over Reynolds' desk. "Because I thought journalism was about truth, about holding power accountable." Reynolds laughed, a short, harsh sound. "Don't be naive. It's about selling magazines." Xavier took a deep breath, controlling the anger that threatened to boil over. "Then let me put this in terms you'll understand. Ali's confrontation with these commentators is the biggest story in sports right now. Everyone's talking about it. If we don't publish it, someone else will, and we'll look like we're protecting the old guard." Reynolds frowned, considering this. "You've got 24 hours to rewrite it. Soften the edges, make it less inflammatory." "I won't change the facts," Xavier said firmly. "I'm not asking you to change the facts. I'm asking you to present them in a way that won't get us sued." Reynolds picked up the phone, signaling the conversation was over. Outside the office, Xavier leaned against the wall, eyes closed. The fight for this story was becoming as dramatic as Ali's own battles. His editor at the Harlem Chronicle, where he also contributed pieces, had already turned it down, saying it was too controversial. But Xavier knew this story needed to be told. Not just Ali's confrontation, but what led to it. The systematic campaign to discredit one of the greatest athletes of their time, because he dared to stand up for his beliefs. As Xavier walked through the bustling newsroom, a hand caught his arm. It was Sarah Jenkins, one of the few female reporters at the magazine, confined mostly to writing about fashion and human interest stories, despite her sharp investigative instincts. "I overheard," she said quietly. "Reynolds is never going to let you publish that piece the way it should be published." Xavier sighed. "I know, but I have to try." Sarah looked around to make sure no one was listening, then pulled him aside. "There's another way. I have a contact at the Village Voice. They're looking for exactly this kind of story. Something raw, truthful, that the mainstream press won't touch." Hope flickered in Xavier's chest, but caution quickly doused it. "If I go behind Reynolds' back, my career here is over." "Maybe," Sarah admitted. "But isn't that what Ali did? Risked everything for what he believed in?" The parallel wasn't lost on Xavier. He thought about Ali, standing alone against not just those 12 commentators, but against an entire system designed to keep men like him in their place. If Ali could risk his title, his livelihood, for his principles, couldn't Xavier risk his comfortable position at a prestigious magazine? "Give me your contacts information," he said finally. "But I need to try one more thing first." That evening, Xavier found himself in a small, dimly lit restaurant in Harlem. Across from him sat Muhammad Ali, listening intently as Xavier explained the situation with his article. "They want me to water it down," Xavier finished. "Make it palatable for their audience. Remove the teeth." Ali nodded slowly, unsurprised. "They always want us to be smaller, quieter, less threatening." He leaned forward. "But here's what they don't understand. Our power comes from refusing to shrink." "I might lose my job," Xavier admitted. "What's a job compared to your integrity?" Ali asked, then smiled. "Besides, you're Xavier Collins, the man who can talk his way into any room, who makes America forget they're listening to a black man for 30 seconds at a time. You'll land on your feet." Xavier laughed, despite the knot of anxiety in his stomach. "You make it sound so simple." "It is simple," Ali replied. "Not easy, but simple. You know what's right. The hard part is finding the courage to do it." As they parted ways, Ali gripped Xavier's shoulder. "Whatever you decide, know this. Your words have power. Use them wisely. Walking home through the streets of Harlem, Xavier made his decision. He would publish the article as it was meant to be, truthful, powerful, unflinching. If Sports Illustrated wouldn't run it, the Village Voice would, and if that cost him his career at the magazine, then perhaps it wasn't the right place for him anyway. The next morning, Xavier placed his revised article on Reynolds's desk, unchanged except for the correction of a few typos. Then he called Sarah's contact at the Village Voice and set up a meeting, just in case. The die was cast. Like Ali, he had taken his stand. As he sat at his desk, waiting for the inevitable explosion from Reynolds' office, Xavier felt something he hadn't expected. Peace. For the first time in his career, he was putting the truth above all else. Whatever came next, he could face it knowing he had stayed true to himself and to the story that needed to be told. The phone on his desk rang. It was Reynolds. My office. Now. Xavier took a deep breath, straightened his tie, and prepared for the fight of his professional life. What the hell is this, Collins? Reynolds slammed the article down on his desk. His face was flushed with anger, a vein pulsing at his temple. I told you to tone it down. Xavier stood his ground, hands clasped behind his back. With respect, sir, I can't tone down the truth. What happened in that room needs to be reported accurately. You're talking about some of the most respected sports commentators in the country. I'm talking about men who use their platforms to attack Ali for his personal beliefs. Xavier countered. Men who called him unpatriotic, a traitor, without ever trying to understand his position. Reynolds ran a hand through his thinning hair. Do you have any idea what will happen if we publish this? The advertisers will lose? The backlash? Do you have any idea what will happen if we don't? Xavier leaned forward, placing his palms on Reynolds' desk. This story is getting out one way or another. The question is whether Sports Illustrated wants to be on the right side of history. The two men stared at each other, the tension between them almost visible in the air. Finally, Reynolds sank back into his chair. You're that certain this is the right move? I am, Xavier said without hesitation. Ali is fighting for something bigger than boxing. He's fighting for the right to stand by his convictions, even when it costs him everything. Don't we owe it to our readers to do the same? Reynolds was silent for a long moment, then reached for his phone. Get me Jenkins, he barked into the receiver. When Sarah appeared at the door minutes later, he gestured her in. You worked with Collins on this Ali piece? Sarah glanced at Xavier before answering. I provided some research, yes. And you stand by it? Every word? She straightened her shoulders. Every word, sir. Reynolds looked from Sarah to Xavier, then back to the article on his desk. Fine. We'll run it. But if this blows up in our faces, it's on both of you. As they left Reynolds' office, Sarah grabbed Xavier's arm, her eyes wide with disbelief. Did that just happen? Is he actually going to publish it? Xavier was equally stunned. I think so. But don't celebrate yet. There's still plenty of time for him to change his mind. Over the next 24 hours, Xavier and Sarah worked feverishly to finalize the article, checking every fact, every quote, ensuring it was bulletproof against any potential legal challenges. They knew they would only get one shot at telling this story, and it had to be perfect. The night before the magazine was set to go to print, Xavier received a call at home. It was Ali. I heard your piece is running, Ali said, his voice crackling through the phone line. Reynolds must have more courage than I gave him credit for, or he's smart enough to recognize a story that will sell magazines, Xavier replied, though he suspected there was more to Reynolds' decision than just business. Either way, I wanted to thank you, Ali continued. Not many people are willing to put their necks on the line for me these days. I'm not doing it for you, Xavier said honestly. I'm doing it because it's the truth, and because what's happening to you is wrong. Ali was quiet for a moment. You know, after I walked out of that room, I wondered if it had made any difference, if anything would change. It made a difference to me, Xavier said. And after people read this article, it might make a difference to them too. That's all we can hope for, Ali replied. To make a difference, one person at a time. After hanging up, Xavier couldn't sleep. He paced his small apartment, wondering if he had made the right choice. What if the article backfired? What if it made things worse for Ali? What if it ended Xavier's career before it had really begun? But then he remembered Ali's words from the restaurant. What's a job compared to your integrity? Xavier had spent his entire career navigating white spaces, carefully managing how he presented himself, tamping down his anger at the injustices he witnessed daily. For once, he had chosen truth over caution, principle over pragmatism. Whatever happened next, he could live with himself. The following afternoon, Xavier stood in the Sports Illustrated offices, holding the freshly printed issue in his hands. His article was the cover story, Ali's determined face staring out at the world, with the headline, "The Fight Outside the Ring, Muhammad Ali's Battle for Respect." As staff members moved around him, some offering congratulations, others avoiding his gaze, Xavier opened the magazine with trembling hands. There it was, his name, his words, telling the story that needed to be told. Sarah appeared at his side, a wide smile on her face. "You did it," she said softly. "It's perfect." "We did it," Xavier corrected her. "I couldn't have done this without you." Reynolds emerged from his office, his expression unreadable as he approached them. "Well, Collins, the issue's hitting newsstands as we speak. I hope you're ready for what comes next." "What comes next, sir?" Reynolds's face broke into an unexpected smile. "If I had to guess, I'd say a Pulitzer nomination and a lot of very angry phone calls from Howard Mitchell and his friends." As Reynolds walked away, Xavier exchanged a look of disbelief with Sarah. Had they actually pulled this off? Had they managed to tell Ali's story the way it deserved to be told? Only time would tell. But for now, Xavier Collins had done what Muhammad Ali had inspired him to do, stood up for the truth no matter the cost. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within 24 hours of the magazine hitting newsstands, Sports Illustrated's phone lines were jammed with calls. Letters began pouring in, some praising the courage of the publication for telling Ali's side of the story, others condemning them for giving a platform to a draft dodger. Xavier Collins became an overnight sensation. Television networks wanted interviews. Newspaper reporters called for quotes. His inbox overflowed with messages from both supporters and detractors. In the eye of this storm, Xavier maintained his composure, redirecting attention back to the substance of his article and the broader issues it raised about race, patriotism, and the responsibility of the media. 1 week after publication, Xavier sat in a green room at CBS, preparing for an interview on the evening news. The door opened, and to his surprise, Muhammad Ali walked in, followed by his entourage. "Thought you could use some moral support," Ali said with a grin, clasping Xavier's hand. "Besides, I figured if they're going to talk about me, I should be here to set the record straight." The producer nearly fainted when she realized she now had both Muhammad Ali and Xavier Collins for her segment. Hastily, the show was rearranged to accommodate the unexpected guest. When the cameras rolled, the interviewer, a middle-aged white man named Robert Taylor, began with what he clearly thought was a challenging question. "Mr. Collins, many critics are saying your article shows a clear bias in favor of Muhammad Ali. How do you respond to accusations that you've abandoned journalistic objectivity?" Xavier smiled calmly. "Objectivity doesn't mean giving equal weight to all sides regardless of facts. The commentators I wrote about had been criticizing Ali for months without ever speaking to him directly about his position. When he confronted them, many couldn't defend their statements. That's not bias. That's reporting what happened." Ali nodded approvingly. Taylor turned to him next. "Mr. Ali, since losing your title, you've become even more outspoken. Do you regret the stance you've taken given the cost to your career?" "Let me ask you something," Ali replied, leaning forward intently. "If someone asked you to go thousands of miles from home to fight people who never did anything to you, who don't speak your language, who don't threaten your freedom, would you go?" Taylor looked uncomfortable. That's not the question." "That is exactly the question," Ali interrupted. "I don't regret standing up for what I believe. I don't regret saying no to a war I don't believe in. And I don't regret walking into that room and confronting those men who've been attacking me without understanding my position." The interview continued, with both Ali and Xavier deftly handling increasingly pointed questions. Throughout, they maintained their composure, refusing to be baited into angry responses that could be edited and used against them later. As they left the studio, Ali draped an arm around Xavier's shoulders. "You handled yourself like a champion in there. I learned from watching you," Xavier replied with a smile. "Where to now?" Ali asked as they stepped onto the busy New York street. Xavier checked his watch. "I have a meeting with the editors of the New York Times. They want to discuss a potential position." Ali raised an eyebrow. "Moving up in the world?" "Maybe." They say they're looking for fresh voices, perspectives that aren't being heard. Xavier hesitated. But I'm not sure if they want me for my talent or just to say they have a black journalist on staff. Does it matter? Ali asked. Either way, you get a platform. What you do with it is up to you. Xavier considered this. You're right. Just like you used boxing to get people to listen to your message. They paused at a newsstand where stacks of Sports Illustrated displayed Ali's determined face. Nearby, a group of young black men recognized Ali and approached hesitantly, asking for autographs. As Ali signed their magazines, one of them turned to Xavier. You're Collins, right? The one who wrote this? When Xavier nodded, the young man grinned. Man, you told it like it is. We need more brothers like you telling our stories. The simple comment affected Xavier more deeply than all the professional accolades he'd received. This was why he had taken the risk. Not for fame or career advancement, but to ensure that stories like Ali's were told truthfully, without the filter of prejudice and fear that so often distorted the portrayal of black men in America. As Xavier and Ali parted ways, Ali gripped his hand firmly. Remember, Collins, they're going to try to change you, make you softer, less threatening. Don't let them. I won't, Xavier promised. And you remember, no matter what they take from you now, history will vindicate you. Ali smiled, his eyes bright with the unshakable confidence that had made him not just a great boxer but a cultural icon. History already has, brother. They just don't know it yet. 6 months later, Xavier Collins sat in the front row as Muhammad Ali won his court case against the draft board. The Supreme Court had unanimously overturned his conviction for refusing induction into the armed forces. It would still be years before Ali could box professionally again, but this was a crucial victory, a vindication of his principles and his right to stand by them. After the decision was announced, Ali held an impromptu press conference on the courthouse steps. Reporters shouted questions from all directions, but Ali pointed directly at Xavier, giving him the first question. How does it feel to be vindicated by the highest court in the land? Xavier asked. Ali's smile was radiant. It feels like justice, not just for me, but for everyone who stands up for what they believe, even when the whole world tells them they're wrong. Later, as they shared a quiet moment away from the crowds, Ali handed Xavier an envelope. Inside was a letter offering Xavier a position as a regular contributor to a new black-owned magazine focused on politics, culture, and sports. I put in a good word, Ali said with a wink. Told them you're almost as pretty as me and twice as smart. Xavier laughed, but was deeply touched by the gesture. His article about Ali had indeed changed his life, opening doors that had previously been closed to him, but also closing some that had once seemed promising. Some mainstream publications now considered him too controversial, too political, but others valued precisely those qualities, seeking his unique voice and perspective. You know, Xavier said thoughtfully, when I was a kid watching you fight, I never imagined I'd end up in the middle of your biggest battle. And I never imagined a sports writer would turn out to be one of my strongest allies, Ali replied. Just goes to show you never know who's going to be in your corner when the real fight begins. As they watched the sun setting over Washington, D.C., Xavier reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. It had begun with a confrontation. Ali walking into a room full of men who had judged him without understanding him. It had continued with Xavier's decision to tell that story, regardless of the professional risk. And it had led here, to a friendship forged in shared struggle and mutual respect. What's next for the great Muhammad Ali? Xavier asked. Ali's eyes sparkled with the determination that had made him a champion. Getting my title back, then using it to do some good in this world. He turned to Xavier. And you? What's next for the man who told my story when no one else would? Xavier thought about the opportunities before him. The chance to write for publications that valued truth over comfort, substance over safety. The chance to tell stories that mattered, stories that might change minds and hearts, just as his article about Ali had done. I'm going to keep fighting, Xavier said simply. With words instead of fists, but fighting nonetheless. Ali nodded approvingly. That's all any of us can do. Keep fighting, keep standing up, keep speaking truth. He grinned suddenly, the familiar mischievous light returning to his eyes. And remember what I always say. Float like a butterfly. Sting like a bee. They finished together, laughing. As they walked back toward the waiting crowds, Xavier knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, he would face them with the same courage and conviction that Ali had shown. The fight for justice, for truth, for dignity. It wasn't confined to the boxing ring or the courtroom or the pages of a magazine. It was everywhere, every day, in ways both large and small. And like Muhammad Ali, Xavier Collins was ready to go as many rounds as it took.